Jamie, are we thumbs up? We're thumbs up. Excellent. Good afternoon. I'm Bill Shambra, Director of the Bradley Center for Philanthropy and Civic Renewal at the Hudson Institute. Kristen McIntyre and I welcome you to today's discussion of a terrific new book written by Richard Watts entitled Fables of Fortune, What Rich People Have That You Don't Want. We're particularly pleased to be able to co-sponsor today's event with the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise, an organization that was founded over 30 years ago by Robert Woodson, who's with us today. But first, our customary preview of coming attractions. Please mark your calendars for April 19th, when we're going to be discussing an essay that appeared recently in the Stanford Social Innovation Review entitled A Decade of Outcome-Oriented Philanthropy. It was written by Paul Brest, who's the outgoing president of the Hewlett Foundation in California. We've only begun to assemble the panelists, but they will, of course, include Mr. Brest himself, as well as one of the legendary historians of the field of philanthropy, Stanley Katz of Princeton University. And now for today's topic. The book before us calls to mind nothing so much as Andrew Carnegie's advice from the famous essay published in 1889 that became known as the Gospel of Wealth. As he noted therein, why should men leave great fortunes to their children? If this is done from affection, is it not misguided affection? Observation teaches us that, generally speaking, it is not well for the children that they should be so burdened. For it is no longer questionable that great sums bequeathed often work more for the injury than for the good of the recipients. Looking at the usual result of enormous sums conferred upon legatees, the thoughtful man must shortly say, I would as soon leave to my son a curse as the almighty dollar, and admit to himself that it is not the welfare of the children, but family pride, which inspires these legacies. Now, Fables of Fortune is full of stories that bear out Carnegie's observations, describing problems that wealth seems to create not only for the children of the wealthy, but for the health and welfare of the wealthy themselves. We're fortunate to have with us an expert panel to discuss the book today and other issues related to what rich people may have that we don't necessarily want. We'll hear first from the author himself. Richard Watts is founder and president of Family Business Office, a legal and consulting firm that manages some of the country's wealthiest families and their family office enterprises. We'll then hear from Anne LeBleu, who administers the daily foundation operations of Arabella Advisors' managed foundation clients. Next, John Murray, headmaster of Fourth Presbyterian School in Potomac, Maryland. And finally, Pastor DeForest Buster Soares, senior pastor of the First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens in Somerset, New Jersey. So, Mr. Watts, turning it over to you, and you can...
Thank you very much. I'm Richard Watts, and I thank you for inviting me here to speak with you. I thank Bob Woodson. It's been a wonderful connection with him and the Hudson Institute as well for having me. I often ask myself the question in the last 3 months since the book has been published, why in the world is this something that people want to hear about? I really wrote it with the intent to say to middle America that what people look for in their lives today, the people that are out buying lotto tickets today with a 370 million to 1 opportunity to win, and the money that they're going to win, what is the draw that makes it so interesting to us? Why do we want to know about the lives of the super rich? And what is it about them that causes us so much pain because we can't have it? So the opportunity that presented itself was that I have been 30 years practicing law. I've had the opportunity to weave in and amongst these families and to be the manager of these families for 30 years. A family business office was something that I created because the legal business itself was something that was difficult to manage because it really was something that was about putting fires out. Clients brought me fires, and my job was to put the fire out. Eventually, the clients came and they said, I'd like you to try to prevent the fire. So would you mind going out in front of us and dealing with the public and dealing with the masses And please keep us in a place where we're uninjured, that we are not affected by what goes on out there. And so it became my job to manage these families. And I want to start out by saying right away that it is not my intent, nor has it ever been, to condemn the wealthy or the actions of the wealthy, or to make it sound like their lives are miserable all of the time, because they're not. They get to do some pretty spectacular things, I promise. And things that really are more spectacular to you than they are to them. When I contact a client of mine that's chartering a boat that's $300,000 for 2 weeks in the Mediterranean with 6 of their couple buddies, and they're traveling around with a chef, and they're stopping in places where they get entree into anything that they want anywhere they go, from a restaurant that you can't get reservations to a hotel, to a play, to a venue. They're there and they're getting in. The thing that's so amazing to me to watch is that they don't care as much as you do. The have-nots, which is all of us, care a great deal about what the haves are doing. And the haves are a little frightened of you, because I think they don't want you to know that their lives are about the same as yours in a lot of respects, only finances isn't one of them. The only difference, finances isn't one of them. So you say, well, you know what, I'm willing to take on my life with no financial problems. So who wouldn't buy into that opportunity? And all of us do, and all of us dream about it. But the truth is that when you get there, there are things that are created by wealth in and of itself that you at this stage, and there may be people of super wealth here, so I'm speaking assuming there's no one here worth over a couple $100 million. I'll ask you to stand at the end, both for Bob and for myself. There are things that are created, responsibilities that you cannot imagine when you get there. And it would be like if I said to all of you right now, would anyone that would like a check today for $1 million, raise your hand? All of you would raise your hand. I mean, there's no one here. If you really think about it, I'd almost like to see someone here raise their hand that wouldn't take $1 million if I gave it to you. And the sense is that can only make your life better. If I told you that I have a rescue pet up here, a dog or cat, for any one of you to take home, and I'd say, how many would stand up and take the rescue pet home? Few of you would take the rescue pet home. And the reason is because you believe that there is a responsibility that comes with that. It doesn't just stop today. There's food, there's taking care of the pet, there's loving it, there's caring for it, all of that. Well, just like there are responsibilities and whatnot that come with that pet, there are attributes that come with a lot of money. And I can just gloss over a couple of those. First of all, the friends that you have will change. The friends that you have would significantly change. You said, I can find friends. I've got my current friends. I'm going to take them with me. Doesn't work, because the current friends that go with you eventually get intimidated by the fact that you're doing things they can't afford to do. And if you pay for them to go with you, they will cease being your friends eventually. So the friends change. The acquaintances and the people that you meet. I am the vet I vet all of the people that are coming through to my family. That means anybody that they meet that has any business opportunity, insurance, brokerage, wealth management, anything that they want to have done with a family, that's something that I take as a meeting in my office. And I'm the guy that's responsible for basically saying no to 95% of those people. And 5% of them, maybe they get a yes where they get a meeting with a client or we go further. So there is this sense that they have got people coming at them all the time that want something. And what they want is their money. The second thing is that your friends not only change, but the children and the families around you change. And you say, well, no, I've got a great family. If I got wealthy right now, I'd be fine. I'd be able to manage that family. Not true. What happens is that children come up underneath parents of wealth, and there are certain expectations that are set by those parents. It's not the kid's fault. It's typically the parent's fault. But I see this every day, and I have family that come to me, and they'll say, you know, I don't understand what mom and dad's problem is. What do you mean? Well, they have a lot of money. I don't. I'd like to do what they do, and I can't. I'm 35 or 40 years old. Why? And I say, well, that's something you want to take up with your parents. Oh, yeah, they said call you. So I wind up I deal with the parents sometimes too, and the kids. So what happens is you have a circumstance where 3 children present themselves, and this is in my book, one of the chapters in my book, and they sit around, they want a conference, they're in their 40s. And they basically say to mom and dad that are sitting there, there's warm money and there's cold money. Warm money is that money you give us when you're alive, and it feels good and you can hug us when you give us it. Cold money is when you're dead. That's when we get it all at one time. And his thesis was, it's better to give warm money than to give cold money. So give it to me now. That was it. That was about as sly a chess game as that child could play. And there have been very few times that I've wanted to reach across the table and grab some guy by the neck and strangle him. But that was one of them. And they walked out, and the parents sat there, and the mother started crying. And she said, what have we done? What have we done? What you don't know is they were already receiving $400,000 a year just to take care of it. Just to take care of it. It wasn't enough. They wanted more. That's a heartbreak for a family. That's a heartbreak for mom and dad. It's very difficult to do. You say, well, maybe I could deal with my kids. Well, you have to get there to realize that you can only eat so many fancy meals. You can only be on so many boats, so many yachts. And then you lose the compression that happens to all of us in life. And therein is another area that rich people have that you don't want, and that is they lack the compression that makes them able to contrast and feel that today is tough, and tonight when I get home, the day's over, and I can sit down and have a beer and watch TV, and problems are out of my mind. For them, oftentimes, because of the panoply of everything they can do, it always feels like they look outward and they dream of things they can have, and they just reach for those things. They take trips, they buy boats, they buy cars, they buy jets, but ultimately there's nothing that satisfies, and it's difficult because they don't get compressed with very many things. The things that compress them are things they can't solve with money, and those are the ones I just talked about, the friends, the families. It's difficult when those are the only things that create compression and stress in your life, is you don't have any friends. And that's not all of them. And again, these are examples. I don't want you to take away from this that everybody in the wealthy category is unhappy every day. It's not the case. But it is a mixed bag. What I did want to say to you is to talk about children a little bit more, the children of entitlement, because I think that affects all of us. And it's been interesting, some of the articles that I've written for the newspapers lately have asked for articles about children of entitlement. And it is come to the point where I believe for most of my clients that you have to start with a position of asking yourself, if I inherit to my kids or leave to my kids even modest sums of money, what is going to be the effect of that? What's the effect of leaving sums of money? You think, well, God, I don't have enough money. Well, some of you have a home. I've watched families derail when 2 kids go after a home worth $500,000, $250,000 apiece. And I've watched arguments occur about one wants to rent it, one wants to sell it, one wants to keep it, one wants to sell it, back and forth, to where they wind up with lawyers and a partition action, and eventually they're going to war and they never talk again. Over $500,000. I've watched it happen dozens of times. So you have to ask yourself the question of, what am I going to do to benefit them? And what would it have done to benefit you had you received it at that time in your life? It's not that you don't do it, it's that you ask the questions and you recognize that there are consequences. The story, how many have read the book? Can I ask, just so I understand I'm not talking to too many people? Okay. So the story I want to briefly tell you is my own circumstance about my son Todd. And leave you with that as a thought of my fault. Here's my screw up. But where it happened and how it happened, I don't know. It's just that there's ways to work out of these things, and ways that are right, ways that are wrong. My son Todd went to USC. He graduated with great grades, had the opportunity of going on to graduate school from there. He was on a tight budget with me. I'm a real big guy about tight budgets, live on below my means. I've always done that sort of thing. I'm very careful about that. So does my wife of 32 years. And Todd was the middle of 3 sons. Todd went to school, got done with USC, got a job within a week. Couldn't figure out why all the other kids at USC got jobs like 3 months later, because they wanted to chill and kind of unwind from the college experience, that was just a big fraternity, sorority, and drinking fest as far as I was concerned. But they all were very busy. They got done with their college careers, but Todd went right to work. And he almost nervously went to work. And after about a year of working, he finally came to me and broke down. He said, "Dad, I got a big problem." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I got a little credit card debt." I said, "Where'd that come from?" He said, "College at USC." And I said, "Well, you never told me about that. I understood you're living on a budget." He said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I couldn't keep up with a lot of the kids that are there on the budget that you put me, and they're traveling and they're doing things. They're going spring break and they're going to games and all that. I couldn't keep up." So he said, "I spent on credit cards because they offer a lot of credit cards. Everybody's giving you cards." I said, "Well, how many cards are we talking about here?" And I'm thinking $1,000 limit, right? 7 cards, $1,000 limit. And he says, "I got 7 cards." I said, "Do you have any idea what the interest rate is on those cards?" He said, "Not really." He says, "All I know is that I'm right now required just to keep the cards active. I'm going back and forth, but I'm spending like $700 or $800 of the net $2,500 I'm making a month is going to credit cards." And he says, "I can't pay for my apartment, I can't pay for food." And therein became a very important decision to make on our part as parents. That's the child of entitlement as far as I'm concerned. I said, "How much is the debt?" And I'm literally squeezing my hands thinking it can't be 10 grand. Please, God, it can't be 10 grand. And he says, $47,000. So now we got a problem. And you know something? This becomes an intermarital problem.
Yes, sir.
You know there's a yin and a yang,
Yes,
always in a marriage. And I went home to my wife and she said, "You know, he's been a great student. Pay it. Pay it off. Give him a fresh start."
Right.
That's what I heard.
Right.
And my wife said, "You're not going to be that typical guy you are you, that's always putting people on budgets, including me." And all of a sudden I got a thing going with my budget with my wife. And it was tough. It was a struggle. But I knew the right thing was to make him feel the consequences of what he'd done.
Yeah.
So I said, "Here's our deal. I can refinance that card at 6%. Put it in your name. I'll co-sign for it. Here's our deal. $700 a month. That'll pay it off in X amount of years. You pay that no matter what you said. I can't live what I'm doing right now," I said, "but you're going to pay the $700 a month. You figure it out." So he did that. And he had to move in with 3 other guys. There were 4 total in an apartment in Santa Monica. He took sack lunches to work every day where he used to kind of hang out and buy stuff with people. He wanted to go on trips that all these people were going on that had net money to spend. And he had nothing. It was really tragic. And I got to tell you something. I paid for that debt. I didn't pay for it with a checkbook, but I paid for it in the acrimony of my own marriage for about 4 years, 3.5, 4 years. He got done with working for his job in Los Angeles, and he got admitted to Yale Business School to complete his MBA. And he said, "Dad, I got admitted to Yale." Back on the dole, right? And I said, "Well, yeah, I'll help you, but you're going to pay that credit card debt." He said, "Well, I can't do that. I can't do that and survive." And I said, "You go figure it out. It's not my problem." So he went to Yale and he actually got an extra loan for that, where he could continue to pay the $700, and he did, until he finally graduated and he got a job on Wall Street at J.P. Morgan. And J.P. Morgan paid him a signing bonus that netted him. He was down to $25,000 was what the card was down to after that 3 years, $700, 3.5 years. And he called me on the phone. He said, "Dad," he said, "I just got a signing bonus." And he said, "It netted me 30 grand. And I said, "Well, that's impressive." And he says, "I know what I got to do." He says, "I know what I got to do. I promised you," this is part I didn't tell you, is that as soon as he gets any net money bonuses, anything that comes out, it's got to go to the principal. So I sat in California and watched on the internet as he punched that button, transferring $25,000 from his account to his card, and I watched it go to zero. And it was a terrible thing to feel that I was responsible for all that, but to see what happened to him in the following 2 years through today, of how tight this guy is, how cheap this guy is, and he's turned into a wonderful young man that actually is coming by train, because he said he won't pay the airfare, coming by train tomorrow here to see me, and we're going to go to dinner tomorrow night. But the moral of that story is of course, my wife, when she tells people this story, she says "we." She always says "we." I don't know where that "we" comes from. It wasn't "we" anything. I took a lot of heat for the whole time. But she says, "We did this for ourselves." And ultimately, it really, I like her taking credit for it, because I think really she understood deep in her heart that that was something we needed to do. So we all face that struggle, and the wealthy face it at an exponential rate more than you can ever imagine, many of whom can't return. But we're all, and that's the message that I had hoped to convey to all of us, is that we really do have the luxury of a simple life in a lot of ways. We have lots of struggles and we have a lot of stress. But you guys get to go and sit in a place where you enjoy something just feverishly. You have hobbies, you have something that you like to do. If you get to do that to the nth degree and 50 things like it, and can do nothing but imagine what you want to do and do more and more and more, I can promise you, you can only eat steak so many days of the week, and after that, steak is terrible. It just isn't as good as you think. So it's my pleasure to speak with you, and thank you very much, and I'll go ahead and open this to the panel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that. That was great. So good afternoon. I'm Ann LeBlue, and first I wanted to thank Bill Shambra and the Hudson Institute for inviting me to participate today. And I also would like to congratulate Richard on his book, because it's quite an accomplishment. And we were in the green room, and he kind of told us about all the steps that he took to get it published. And so I know how dedicated you were to the endeavor, and so congratulations.
Thank you.
I wanted just for a few seconds just tell you what I do, so it'll make my remarks will probably make more sense if I tell you about what I do on a daily basis. So I work for Arabella Advisors. We're a philanthropic consulting firm, and what we do is we work with actually solely for philanthropists, with institutional foundations as well as individuals and families. And I work with the department that focuses on individuals and families. And we do strategic work with families and individuals who have decided to set up a private foundation. So it can be creating a mission or vision for a foundation and talking about other kind of really big picture ideas, or even kind of reimagining visions for foundations. But we also do the nitty gritty, the everything back operations, everything. So we do also serve sometimes, much like you must, as the gatekeeper for a lot of our clients who are very busy individuals and would prefer to kind of keep their philanthropy and their personal lives separate. So with that introduction, I just wanted to get really to the essence of this work that we're discussing today, that essentially it's that we don't necessarily want what rich people have, but I want to focus on the glass half full approach and really talk about philanthropy. The philanthropic opportunity that people of wealth have, when it's managed correctly and supported in the right way, can be incredibly fulfilling and can actually help offset some of the issues that are mentioned in the book. And in particular, I wanted to address 3 specific characteristics that came to me when I was reading the book, and also address kind of a more nuts and bolts aspect. So essentially, I thought, well, successful and strategic philanthropists that I've met and worked with really share a few qualities and have essentially also set themselves up to succeed in a particular way. So it's having solid philanthropic infrastructure and having particular passion for what you do. And that might seem a little odd because you think, okay, this is like human attributes versus, kind of setting up illegal and governance structures to ensure that you succeed well in your work. But they really do dovetail, and you need both in order to be successful. So the first aspect is really the commitment to engagement. And Richard's book prompted me to think about those motivations to be committed to a cause. And I reflected on the qualities that the individuals and families share. And so I think it's very true. You caution this in your book, that philanthropy can often be a burden for individuals and families because it's people asking them for things, and they might not necessarily know how to respond to that. But I think for the individuals and families who have identified a need or a passion that they care about, and they've developed the strategic framework for, kind of achieving that goal that they've set out for themselves, they actually derive the most satisfaction out of the whole experience because they've been incredibly, I think, kind of forward-thinking in the way they approach the problem. So what are those 3 characteristics that really help, that I've seen over time with individuals and families? The first is passion, so they're passionate. We work with people who have often been incredibly successful in their professional lives, as well as their personal lives. And they want to use those same strategies to achieve a greater good. You know, they don't see why philanthropy should not be used in that same way, in the kind of the business approach that they use. And then, so as a transition to that, they're entrepreneurial. I mean, these people are not afraid of getting their hands dirty and really understanding the problem at hand. So they essentially use their professional drive that they've used all their lives and translate that passion into strategic philanthropy. And that means, you know, they have a high threshold for risk. And for those who are interested in philanthropy and who might be working in the philanthropic space, you know, what does that mean if a client who has a high threshold for risk, they'll tend to think really creatively about the issues and think outside the box and might, you know, there's a 5% payout for private foundations. Many of them will spend way more than their annual 5% payout because they really want to get to the crux of the problem. They'll do mission investing, impact investing. They'll also, they'll do, you know, try to work at the federal level and try to change policy. And they also get involved in their communities. And so that's where you just talk about the kind of disconnect, spiritual disconnect. And I think, you know, these people want to see the community leaders at work, and they want to get involved, and they want to see how they can help them. And so it's an engagement that goes above and beyond than just writing the checkbook, you know, the check at the end of the day. And lastly, I think the third characteristic that stuck out for me is good stewardship. You know, they are clients that we work with, they really care about good values, and they know that with this tremendous opportunity with their wealth comes also an enormous amount of responsibility. And so that's where the really interesting and I'd say complex work comes in, where you have to work with the next generation and involve them in philanthropy for them to understand that this wealth, they're really being stewards of wealth, and they have to play an important role in making sure that the philanthropic investments they're greater than themselves. It's something that they're doing outside of themselves, outside of their daily concerns. And I think, you know, immersing oneself in a cause that's larger than your daily problems, you know, when you go home, really helps actually retain the spiritual aspect that you refer to in your book. The clients that I've worked with have achieved this by developing their, you know, additional knowledge about interests, issue areas that they're really passionate about. They've created an entire network and created new colleagues and friends and collaborators in their philanthropic work. And they've also, you know, even been volunteers for different types of services in the communities in which they decided to give. And so those really help individuals and families look holistically at philanthropy as a way to almost avoid some of those potential pitfalls as well. And so lastly, the infrastructure. So where does infrastructure come into all of this? It's really, you know, so you get people who say, I want to give back. I want to use philanthropy to kind of, you know, make sure my family works together and does things. But, you know, what does that really, that could go a multitude of ways, you know. And those who have really succeeded in engaging their families, and even if they're individuals, those who have succeeded in achieving the goals that they want to achieve through their philanthropy, they really approach this as a business. They don't separate business from pleasure in that sense. They are drawn to their philanthropy because they want to develop an entire logic models about how they might be able to achieve the outcomes they want to achieve. They use their business acumen and their focus to find solutions. And I think they also really we're talking about people here who have the potential to affect thousands, if not millions of lives worldwide. And if well presented and really well thought out, I think that really excites them. And it again goes back to this idea of spirituality, where they feel that they're going above and beyond perhaps their daily concern and getting good work done. And so, how do you set that up? This might sound a little bit surprising, but there's a host of literature out there that, you know, philanthropic research shows that family foundations who actually have set up successful grant-making processes, like getting involved with site visits or doing extensive due diligence on the nonprofits you're investing in, as well as really establishing sound governance services. So what does this look like? Professionally run board meetings, having, you know, term limits, the right types of bylaws, all those systems in place, which is really nuts and bolts infrastructure and governance. they are the ones who report having stronger emotional commitments to their philanthropy, and even at times have reported saying they are in functional family dynamics when families involved in their philanthropy. So that might seem counterintuitive, but essentially you need a strong organizational infrastructure to derive pleasure and success from philanthropy, and not the other way around. And so, in other words, good intentions alone are not going to ensure success or happiness, no matter what you do. And I would argue that it's not just philanthropy where you need a good base and a good infrastructure. You probably need in most everything that you do in your life, right? And so, among all the complicated stories you might hear about the super rich or the wealthy, I think that this helps me identify kind of a silver lining, is that if organized well, philanthropy can serve as a vehicle for family cohesion, and also, I think, even for individuals, really find kind of a renewed spirituality or meaning in their life work. And it also hopefully can be used as a way for many generations to understand the value of wealth and to enjoy giving it away. And so, hopefully through the collaboration that they'll have in their family, and as well as with the nonprofit leaders and the people on the ground, they're also empowered because they feel like they know what they want to do. They know how to get there. They've identified people in the field who have been trustworthy and have been good, who have really been leaders in the field. And so even if they are targeted by fundraisers and people asking them for a lot of money or big donations, they're less compelled to kind of buckle or feel pressured, because they say, hey, I know what I want to do, and it's okay. I understand your cause. It's probably a great one. However, my energies are focused here. And hopefully that gets them outside also of some of the tensions you described in the book around people kind of want to one-up each other at times. And this is saying, okay, my colleague here is also really wealthy, and he's focusing on XYZ mission, but I want to focus elsewhere, and that's okay. And so when you've identified the benchmarks for success, and I also identified a good support system who can at times serve as your gatekeeper, serve as the intermediary between those people who ask you for more services and more money and everything more, you are actually more liberated to focus on the things that you really want to enjoy. And that's, I think, where real change comes in, where once you enjoy the work that you're doing, once you've identified the passion, I think those who are fortunate enough to have great means are therefore then kind of come away with a great clarity of purpose, and that enables them to collaborate with families and friends and entire networks to really achieve the change they seek in the world.
Thank you. My name is John Murray. I'm headmaster of Fourth Presbyterian School in Potomac, Maryland, not too far away. And just want to, first of all, thank Bob for having me, Bob Woodson, the Hudson Institute. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just want to thank Richard. God bless you, brother, for writing this book. I was just reading some of these stories in here. I'm thinking, is this really real? Did he really do this? Just some amazing scenarios, and just the wisdom that God's given you to work through some of these challenges. It's truly a blessing that there's someone like you out there working with families who need great guidance. So thank you. I've spent pretty much my career in education. And just a little bit about myself, I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama. It was just a modest family. Ended up getting a full scholarship to Vanderbilt University, and that was my first really thrust into a lot of wealth area. And all my life I planned to be a lawyer, but God had a different plan for me and took me into education, and which ended up being an incredible joy. I'd done youth ministry, but where I saw God leading me was into private education. And I was at the Westminster Schools in Atlanta, which is in a very affluent area, founded by a lot of Coca-Cola money. But what was interesting and what I didn't realize I was going to be dealing with was a lot of what Richard talks about as children of entitlement, or at least children of means, and how to help them be young men and women of character. Just to give you an example, my first year out of college on my freshman basketball team, I had one of my players' dad was the CEO of a major airline. Another player his dad was an NBA professional referee. Another player was one of the most prominent doctors in Atlanta, worked with amazing patients. And again, just being thrust into this environment and working with these students and seeing the issues they face that are very different from what I grew up with was very fascinating. And just helping them realize what's truly important in life. And when they have everything, as Richard talks about, and a lot of times it can lead to apathy and really wandering in what do I do with my life? Because at 16, I got a brand new Corvette or a brand new BMW and live in a multi-million-dollar home, go on incredible vacations, and to really work with these young people and helping them see what God's purpose is for them and really how they can use their gifts was very fascinating. But I think through my life as I've gone on to different private schools, this has always been a challenge. And I think now we're in the era of, you've heard the term helicopter parents. And being a headmaster of schools with a lot of wealth can be very challenging, because when you want young people to learn from their mistakes, when you want young people to see there are consequences to their actions, and you have parents rushing in that want to blame the school, blame the teacher, and not let their child accept the responsibility and looking to point the finger. And that's obviously very different from a couple of generations ago. Can be very challenging, and really to stand up to that and speak the truth in love, but help them understand the importance of a skinned knee. And sometimes, I've been in a situation where I had to expel a senior the week before graduation because of drugs. And it would be his third time. And that was, those type of decisions are very difficult. And but it's amazing to see, the stories that are very sad when you come in and get threatened to be sued versus the ones where a year later the kid comes back to you. And I had this one year where a kid had totally committed his life to Christ, had totally turned his life around, and thanked me for kicking him out of school. And just the life change that it had in his life. And that doesn't happen a whole lot, I'll just tell you. But when it does, it's a tremendous blessing. But I think one of my passions being in education has been media and teaching children media discernment. This is a course I've taught for many years. I write on this. I've written this for different publications. But I think it's a real challenge that we have, especially now with the introduction of social media. All of you know just what kids are exposed to and the coursing of culture. I think it's a tremendous challenge, and the values that are portrayed a lot of times in media, and helping students navigate that, whether they're students of wealth or just average students like our children. And I was, just thinking about, what they see in kids' eyes, from American Idol to pro athletes, reality shows, rock stars, movie stars, just these lifestyles. And, I'm not a big fan of reality shows, but I do think it's interesting that you really see this, sometimes the grotesque side of some of these stars' lives, and it's really an eye-opener. And you also see some of the tragedy of some of these lives that are lived. And there was an article, I know Buster knew Whitney well, and the family. There was an article that came out this Monday in USA Today. It's all about celebrity addicts, who dies and who survives. And it was obviously featuring Amy Winehouse and Whitney Houston. But this is a full article just talking about stars have money and access. Went on to talk about obviously those who've died over the years and why, and then those who've made it and turned their lives around. It was very interesting to ask my students, these are 8th graders, when you read these stories, what's your reaction? What are just the thoughts that come to your mind? And it was interesting just to see, what they said. We're just writing these on the board. Just obviously a price for fame and fortune, loss of privacy, addictions, that they're, recognizing now, which I think is good, that they see this, they look at these lifestyles and realize there can be a price to this. The other thing that was very fascinating, it makes you think of their work, because a lot of times when people, like someone like Whitney dies, a lot of them were not exposed to her music and introduced to what an amazing, gifted, God-gifted woman this was. What a beautiful voice that she had. And just realizing what a tragedy to lose that talent, that life, that beauty. They said, maybe they did not consider, eternal consequences to their lives, that life is more than just this world. The search for meaning, they have so much but never enough, and that was exactly a quote you had in chapter 1. How much you have, you tend to want a little bit more, is what you said. And I think, that's sad but true. People value them more after their death. And I think a lot of these funerals you see just when you're faced with the reality of death, just the world is temporal. Giving into pressures of a destructive lifestyle. With fame and money comes great responsibility. This is what you said. I said, are you quoting Spider-Man? Or is that actually comes from Jesus? Jesus said that. But most kids know it from Spider-Man. But it's true. And I think that's it's really important to understand that. And then lastly, just not taking ownership of one's own life, pointing the fingers. And I think for me as an educator, particularly as I, have taught a lot of the millennial generation now that they're in their 20s, and I'm from Generation X, lovely title, but anyway, so be it. It's been interesting to see the articles that have been written on the millennials. You're a millennial, right, Ann? It's
I'm
okay.
on the cusp.
Okay. So no offense. You're a great millennial. But this is a recent article that came out 2 weeks ago. Millennials aren't moral or amoral or adrift. And it was fascinating just talking about, just the social justice side of the millennials. They were talking about what David Brooks and Christian Smith and those who've written on the millennials, the more negative side, the dark side. But, a lot of this group was, went to school with required community service. So they have been exposed to philanthropy and reaching out, but a lot of times it's required. So again, sometimes you question what's the motivation for those who are doing this for some other than themselves, a higher purpose, that you see the true philanthropy come out. The flip side of that is what I've dealt with a lot over the years, and this is an older Wall Street Journal article that I've put onto. It's about 4 years old. It was called The Trophy Kids. Y'all tell I'm a visual person. Anyway, sorry. But the Trophy Kids go to work. This is not you. Okay. But just the challenges of, this is The Trophy Kids Grow Up. It's a book by Ron Alsop. But the title inside is The Millennial Generation Goes to Work. And just talks about, the challenges that you face with kids who have always gotten their way or always won, always gotten the trophy, and want things now. Want to be number one now. Don't realize there's a process and time and gaining experience and so forth. So very fascinating, to look at that. And I taught parents when we, everyone doesn't get an award here, and parents come in really upset because we have kids who make the ensemble or don't make the ensemble, and why didn't my child get in? And it's just like, this is a great lesson of life. It's like you don't always get everything, but it's so tragic when you see that. And one of the books Bob and I talked about, I read recently, a guy named Tim Keller. He's a pastor, Redeemer Pres in New York, amazing ministries, planted over 100 churches. Wrote a book called Counterfeit Gods. Sex, Money, and Power, and the Only Hope That Matters. And it's an amazing book. And I heard him speak at the National Cathedral here in D.C. About 2 years ago. And the way he framed it was, our hearts are idol makers. We're always seeking something, what's most important in our lives. And if that's taken away, do we want to live? And I was like, wow, I've never really thought about that in that way before. For me, growing up, it was football. I loved football. And, I remember when I'd play bad games, it would just ruin, my week or month or whatever. And, but, just as kids and even as adults, what's most important in our lives? And I think when they're temporal things, we can see the consequences of that. But Keller talks about even good things like family, or when they become the ultimate thing that we ultimately live for, and we put in a place that he talks about of God or Jesus Christ. What can happen, and just the ministry that he's had in helping people realize what are the idols in their lives that, and you quote from 1 Timothy, money. A lot of people think, they misquote this verse, that money is the root of all evil. And no, that's not it. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. That some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. And I think that's the key is just keeping balance in our lives. And as people of faith, God at the heart of that. So anyway, I just was very encouraged by what you're doing, what you're writing on. I think you're getting at some important issues of spirituality and what that means. And this is what I've written on a lot just over the years. Is one of the things that I really challenge young people on is, what it means to be young men and women of character, and looking not in the present of great role models, but in the past. Because so many times we forget our past. I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal a couple years ago on the history of basketball. And it was right at the beginning of March Madness. And what people didn't realize is that James Naismith invented basketball to share the gospel. He wanted to create a winter sport in Massachusetts where people could come and play a game and then stay for a Bible study. his famous quote was he wanted to win men for the master in the gym. And I was like, did you know that about basketball? What? What? And it was just amazing to see this history. And I framed it in David versus Goliath because, I love following March Madness and the Cinderella teams. And that year it was Butler versus Duke. So this article ended up getting a lot of play. But just that was Naismith's mission. And that's, how God used him in creating this sport, but it was eventually to do something greater than himself. And say for J.C. Penney, I wrote an article recently for the Washington Examiner on J.C. Penney and the Golden Rule. And you've been following J.C. Penney's big success and their marketing and how they've totally turned their stores around. Are you familiar with this? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, just check. Well, what's amazing, I'd read a little about J.C. Penney and didn't know a whole lot about him, but I've got a book actually from our church library on his life. And just an amazing guy, came from nothing. His dad was a pastor and taught him, just do unto others, you have them do unto you. It's the basic principle that Jesus taught, the Golden Rule. And that's what he based his early stores on. And they exploded. And he had all this wealth. And he was doing philanthropic work, he would tell you, but his life was just not fulfilled. And when the stock market crashed in 1929, he lost everything, $40 million. Leading him to experience what he would later call a dark night of the soul. He actually entered the Kellogg Sanitarium and at the advice of a friend, and he said that changed his life forever. That one morning after breakfast, he heard a familiar hymn coming from the small chapel, "Be not dismayed, whatever betide, God will take care of you. All you may need, he will provide. God will take care of you." And he said at that moment, something happened to him that he's never been able to explain or describe. It was a life-changing miracle, and I've been a different man ever since. And in his work, The Spiritual Journey of J.C. Penney, Orlando Tibbetts chronicles this transformation into a life of hope, true hope and purpose, that he later regained his wealth, and more importantly, his renewed faith led to his recommitment to serving others. And I said whether the 99% or the 1%. That was a little modern addition. But he said, and I'll end on this, because you talk about hope as a powerful motivator in your first chapter, and I think that's so true when it's rooted in something other than ourselves. He said, this is what Penney spent the rest of his career going to speak to students, which I thought was really neat. And this is what he would share with them. The secret of my father's life and my mother's life was the way they imitated the master, by giving of themselves with selflessness and sacrifice. They never separated the secular from the sacred. As God-motivated people, they received blessings no money could buy, and they left blessings upon all whom they touched. And I said, in our hyper-partisan culture, those are values worth reclaiming. So, thank you, Rick.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
I went to a church to preach one night, and I asked the pastor, how long can I preach? And he said, you can preach as long as you want to, but we're leaving at 9 o'clock. So, Bill, what is our time issue here?
12 minutes.
All right, good.
We're leading in.
My name is DeForest Soares. I'm from New Jersey. I'm the senior pastor of First Baptist Church in Somerset. One of my colleagues from First Baptist is here, Reverend Garvester Kelly. My friends call me Buster. My enemies call me Buster too. This is very difficult. I'm Baptist, first of all, so I'm not used to being timed. It takes us about 12 minutes just to say good morning. And I want to thank, first of all, Bob and Bill for hosting us and inviting us to this important occasion. I want to thank my colleagues on the panel, but I want to thank Richard Watt for what I think is a game changer. If you haven't read the book, read the book. I think the fact that he's even here is indicative of how significant this moment is and this work is. I published a book last year, and there's pressure on you if you have work to do to be an author who supports a book, and your publisher wants you to go places, and Barnes & Noble wants you over here, and people have ordered hundreds of copies, and now they need the author to show up so that they don't send the books back to the warehouse. And the fact that Richard chose to come here not for the purpose of selling books, but for the purpose of dialogue and sharing ideas. That is a profound difference in what has become an industry driven by sales alone. So thank you, Richard. Just thank you for your work and for your presence.
Thank you.
I think the best way for me to do this is to offer remarks around 3 quotes in the book. In 1953, 2 years before the Montgomery bus boycott, Martin Luther King preached a sermon at his church in Alabama called "The False God of Money." And in that sermon, Dr. King said, "We have confused the means by which we live with the purpose for which we live." And he talked about the idolatrous relationship our culture has developed with money. This is a civil rights leader speaking in a black church on a Sunday morning. Fast forward to 2011, and Richard Watts says money becomes an end in itself rather than a means. If King was a prophet, having said things like this, then I would suggest that Richard Watts is a prophet, because he's come to the same conclusion a different way. King's concern was that the character of the country, all aspects of the country, was being driven by materialism and things. You quote the Apostle Paul. Paul said the love of money is the root of all evil, but the question is, why do we love money? I mean, money can't love us back. The reason we love money is because we love things, and it takes money to buy things. The reason the average American family has almost $10,000 in consumer debt, in some cases $47,000, is because when we run out of money, we don't run out of our love for things. And so plastic becomes the way we bridge the gap between what we have and what we want. My book is called Breaking Free from Financial Slavery, in large measure because this means by which we live has become our master. And we will do and say almost anything to increase our capacity to buy more things. And what you've done, Richard, in your book is you really identified a core character issue with this country. Unfortunately, you know, the concept of morality has become hijacked by religion. And so it's hard to even talk about a moral consensus or ethical framework lest you be marginalized by people who don't want religion. And the genius of this book is that he kind of sneaks in the side door and says that greatness perhaps has less to do with attainment of things and more to do with a quality of life. This is the I think literary corollary to Viktor Frankl in his book Man's Search for Meaning. So this book is not really about money at all. And it's really not about strategic options for the wealthy. If you notice, the name of it is what rich people have that you don't want. You meaning you're not rich. And if you think that hitting the $500 million lottery is a blessing, do some research on those who have hit the lottery and find out what happened to their lives, as complicated as described in this book by Richard. It's a phenomenal discussion because if the wealthy have what everyone wants, yet they don't have what they need, and if the not wealthy are spending all of their time trying to get what the wealthy have, we have, in essence, a sick society that has been infiltrated by a toxic culture, and it undermines the potential for greatness. And it's exacerbated by media that continues to celebrate the people in Richard's book and ignore the reasons for funerals like Whitney's. I had the task of narrating Whitney's funeral on CNN from the outside of the church. And the challenge for me was that I really couldn't say what I felt because we were speaking to 5 million people. But the first third of her life was fantastic before she became famous. The latter 2/3 of her life were tragic, played out before the whole world. The first third of her life, she lived in a humble home on Dodge Street in East Orange, across the street from one of the original McDonald's. And she spent much of her time at McDonald's. Her family had a plastic swimming pool in the backyard above ground. She wore plaid skirts to a Catholic school. She sang in church 2 or 3 times a week. It was a phenomenal life. And her parents worked hard to keep her that way as long as they could. The last 2/3 of her life, she sold 170 million albums, had 7 #1 hit records, and generated over $250 million herself. And the bigger she got, the more tragic her life became, not because she got big, but because, as Richard points out in the book, no one is really prepared for the level of complication that comes with money. And even if you give it away, it's complicated. And it's so complicated that there needs to be an antidote, which brings me to the second quote that I find phenomenal, because the second quote, does what everybody says we need today. It levels the playing field. Here's the second quote. What cannot grow without winnowing away the chaff, wheat cannot grow. Corn cannot be harvested until the stalk is cut, and a healthy adult will not mature without exposure to difficulty and pain. And I say this is a leveler because every parent I know, our church we have about 3,500 families. Most of them are middle income. And all of us work hard to make sure our children have a better life than we did. And we define better with gadgets and clothing and vacations. We go into debt. Middle income parents go into debt to make their children happy and to buy their friendship. And so one need not be wealthy to benefit from this book, because what this says to middle income and even low income families is this: if your children are spared too much pain, if your children are like the children in Luke chapter 15, that's the warm versus what you called it, warm money versus cold money. Jesus has called it a prodigal son. then you are buying into the tragedy of the wealthy without realizing it. When a family of 4 living off of $30,000 a year considers it mandatory to buy a child $150 sneakers, or when a family of 4 making $30,000 a year considers it appropriate to pay $250 a month for pay-per-view, or when a single mother of 3 considers it appropriate to spend $150 a month on fingernails, or when a father of 3 who is behind in his child support considers it appropriate to enter the NCAA pool for $100. We have a crisis that's much bigger than we can measure. And it has tremendous public policy implications, not the least of which being that because our culture has embraced this lifestyle of consumption and living above our means and having what we want right now, it's virtually impossible to help people understand the tragedy of government living that way. And so government gets away with this structural deficit spending, this ungodly borrowing, this leveraging of our future, precisely because it fits within this same cultural framework that has infected the whole country. And the housing crisis that we talk about a lot is one of the more recent examples. We, in our church, we worked with about 500 families who were having difficulty with their mortgages early on in the crisis, and we had a twofold problem. We hear a lot about the problem from the institutional side, where people were tricked into or steered into loans they should not have had, but we hear very little about the fact that these improprieties were made possible by people having appetites. If I make $50,000 a year, no one should be able to convince me to sign an $850,000 mortgage. Nobody. But because I am striving with all my might to be like Richard's clients, even if I don't have the wealth that they have, I want to drive what they drive and live where they live and travel where they travel. I want a five-star life on a one-star budget. And this is a character issue. It's a values issue. This is much more important for me, for normal people in my congregation, than it is the super wealthy, because the majority of the people, I mean, if you just do numbers, the majority of the people are not super wealthy, but they're infected with the same problems. The inability to delay gratification. That's a cultural crisis. It cuts across all races and income levels. And so this idea that pain is a prerequisite for maturity, that helps me as a parent, because when my son sends me a text at 12 o'clock telling me that he needs $25 for pizza, he and his brother in college, I want to know, well, did your cafeteria close down? He said, yeah, but you know, we were out doing something and we missed the deadline and now we're hungry. See, Richard has helped me respond by saying, in the name of Richard Watt, starve. Starve. Because if I satisfy his hunger often enough, I've created a sense of entitlement that not only is unsustainable, but it's injurious to his future. That's a character issue on my part and on my son's part. In fact, what Richard has given us permission to say, thank God for the pain. In fact, let's expedite the pain process. Because perhaps we've been delaying maturation. The experts say now that 30 is the new 21. That parents who were expected to be mature at 21 should expect their children to be mature at 30. And a part of it is because our culture has convinced us that we should, at all costs, eliminate and protect our children from pain. And this book reinforced the idea that the same pain that contributed to my growth and development is the pain that ultimately will do the best job of helping my sons grow up faster. The final quote, which is absolutely revolutionary, is this: perhaps the only way to savor, S-A-V-O-R, the only way to savor the richness in life is to experience being poor. We hear a lot about wealth and poverty. We have a lot of political commentary. We have a lot of social activism. We have a lot of public policy initiatives. But when Richard said that, it reminded me of my experience in sociology as a freshman at Rutgers, when my professor said that people like Richard's clients who have high income are high class. And people like my grandmother who were domestic workers and didn't make much money were low class. And I got kicked out of the class because I argued that class has got to be more than money. And my grandmother was the highest class person I knew. And I knew some rich people didn't have any class at all. So then the question is, therefore what? And if Rich is right, which I believe he is, if the only way to savor the richness in life, that's as a Homo sapien. In other words, if Richard has his finger on something, what he's saying is that to maximize my experience as a human being, that I need to experience being poor. And I don't think Richard's going to tell all of his clients, fire me, give all your money away, and move to the projects. But I do think that there is the potential to experience poverty, to engage in poverty, to connect to poverty, to learn from the poor. I didn't know anything about Xanax and these drugs that calm people down until I met rich people. I never knew you took pills to relax. And therefore, rather than simply saying rich people as being responsible for giving to poor people or bailing poor people out, because the poor, almost by definition, have more options and experience what Rich calls the richness in life. Then perhaps we should be talking about how poor people can teach rich people how to experience the richness in life. Perhaps there's a new paradigm shaping where the rich and the poor have mutual interest. And rather than the 99% beating up on the 1% and the 1% protecting themselves from the 99%, perhaps there is a wealth in both that contributes to the welfare of each through vehicles that we've yet to construct. Because without such therefore, then we're going to have class warfare, we're going to have finger pointing, and we're going to have partisan bickering that winds up undermining civil society. But if we can back off from evaluating people, Dr. King said, you know, I don't want my children being judged by the color of their skin. I don't want my children judged by their credit score or bank account. Because we create barriers that divide people that mask their humanity. I know some people who live in public housing who are very well. They're not on drugs, you know, they have intact families, their children do well in school, they go to church every Sunday, they contribute to other people, and they live on fixed income, minimum wage. And what I heard Richard saying is that he's got some clients that need to meet my friends because my friends may know more about more about enjoying a Sunday afternoon when they're not worried about whether the stock market comes back next week. And they're not stressed over how many people are knocking on their doors asking for money. So I see this book as a game changer. We need new voices in this country. We need voices of prophetic utterance that are not partisan, that have no agenda, and that rise above the normal noise and really calls us to be not just better Americans, but to be better human beings. So thank you, Richard.
Wow.
Richard is not here to sell books. However, let it be noted that in the back of the room, books are for sale at the low price of $10 a copy, today only. So, and for those of you who are watching this on live stream, this is why you should show up in person, because you know these are the bargains that you miss. I want to pick up just a couple of questions for the panel before we go to Q&A. Pastor Sori's challenge to us. Richard, it's certainly, the way you describe philanthropy, the donors believe they're spiritual and charitable because the masses hold them in high esteem for the gift. But what is in the minds of the super-rich givers? They secretly recognize what the audience really wants is their checkbook. Giving away money becomes boring and unsatisfying. Now, Anne describes a way of giving with passion, and she suggests that the clients she works with have found a way to overcome this condition that you describe here. Pastor Soares describes a way that one might overcome that condition through philanthropy. John describes another way, service. Right. I mean, you're suggesting that service projects might be a way for young people to overcome that kind of deadness in giving. Can you say something about? I mean, could you react to those suggestions by way of, you know, is there something in what these folks say that might be helpful to the super rich that you presented?
Yeah, I heard what Ann said, and certainly what Buster said, and perhaps in my book I characterize a very black and white situation in terms of they either are or they aren't, and in this case, I say that most people have very little spirituality or love for giving away their money. They feel they're being hunted. The fact of the matter is that is true in great part. I think that the times they are passionate about giving is when they can connect to a project or to something they feel they are meaningfully changing the direction of or assisting in. If it's the type of thing that they usually encounter, which is 90% of the time, people just trying to weave a great story to get $1 million for their cause, they don't feel any connection to that. But when you actually take one of these people into the field, they become, some of them, I've got clients that have become so passionate that the entrepreneur, as Ann said, in them comes out, and they almost take over the project. They take over building the project. It becomes another rock to climb for them, some of them. But what I'm getting at is that if you're really addressing the issue that I hope would be addressed with these super wealthy that I have, is that they're so far removed from the simple pleasure and appreciating what is available for them amongst all of us. They really need to have a better sense of identifying what the problems are that need to be fixed and be part of that in connection, to be able to lend their support and their heart to that. It's hard to get to their heart, but once you do, I would agree with Ann as well that they usually will take off and become very involved.
So, and involvement is I mean, do you find that to be true? Is it, in other words, there's some danger, I would think, in engaging just the entrepreneurial side, just the takeover part. You know, I can run this project better than you, so get out of the way and let me do it and solve the problem. Right. Yes. Well, we've all seen it, and there are some of us who have constructed critiques of philanthropy around this problem. But Ann, does that sort of coincide with your experience that the ones who who get more out of philanthropy and are more passionate about it become engaged or connected in some fashion?
Yeah, I would say they become advocates for the causes they hold dear. So it's not necessarily that they will take over a project. I think most, in best practices terms, you don't want a donor to dictate your program. That's most nonprofits will tell you that that's usually a recipe for disaster. But I think where if you do connect with at the heart level, as Richard was saying, you as a philanthropist, you often, when you kind of are marginalized because somebody knows that you're of great wealth and that you potentially could be giving a lot of money to their cause or to their project, I think if you manage to actually create a network for yourself, a genuine network, because you are also an advocate for this particular issue, I think that the relationships blossom, and so you can actually develop, working collaborations with nonprofit leaders who are advancing the causes that you wish to see develop and flourish. So I think it's a little bit of give and take, and I wouldn't say that most people I work with, they're thrilled when they've invested. They consider these as investments. They're thrilled when they've invested in nonprofits and leaders who might have had a great idea and it was a grassroots idea and then it just flourished. And they say, hey, I'm behind the scenes I'm checking in with you because I care and I want to see this happen, but they don't need to be in front of it, because if they've thought out their strategy, they know that those people that they've identified in the field are the ones who are doing the good work and are the ones who are well equipped to be carrying out that mission.
I mean, I don't know a lot of super rich people, but I know a couple, right? But I think we have to scale this back to make it accessible. If you look at Richard's book and clients compared to us, it is basically synonymous with us compared to Haitians. When I go to Haiti, I'm super rich compared to somebody living off $200 a year in a tent. So the question becomes, what is truth for both situations? Truth number one is when we take people to Haiti or Ghana or wherever we go, when they are so embedded with integrity in the proposition, whatever it is, that they come away feeling not only that they contributed, but they gained something from the experience themselves. Our people, to the person, say, I went down to the help, and they helped me when I helped them. That's when it's legitimate. And the second is when they feel that they're part of something larger than just a task, that task is connected to a larger truth or movement or initiative, and they played a small part in a big thing. And so we built the well in Haiti, and the well was a part of a larger community, and my church members felt good about that, those who went and those who didn't go. And I believe that if it's going to be a connection, it's got to be such a legitimate connection that that all of the participants and whatever they bring to the proposition have an integral role, and they all leave better for it. And I think that's what we're lacking, and that's what Richard refers to when people are just being asked to write checks. Now, it's hard to do. It's hard to do. When I am called upon by a couple of my very wealthy friends as either a pastor or a counselor or trusted advisor, my wife and I pray before I go that I will not be completely distracted by their net worth. It's hard not to be. You got a guy with a 4-deck yacht and a private jet and houses all over the world, and he wants to talk to you about his son, and you want to talk to him about your budget. I mean, and it's hard. It's hard to restrain yourself, So it takes the Holy Spirit to hold you back. It's hard. But that's where we have to go. We have to get to a point where we can have those kind of breakthroughs, so that we can have meaningful cooperative endeavor.
Can I just add one
Sure,
thing?
please.
I think, and this kind of connects to all of our conversation here, oftentimes we talk about values. People, that might sound strange to people why in philanthropy you start talking about values, but when we usually begin short-term or even long-term engagements with individuals and families, we have a conversation around a table around what are your values.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to John's point and also your point right now. It's like, how do you create those genuine connections about what's important to me, not my net worth, not what I could potentially give to a particular cause, but, what do I want to see, what kind of change do I want to see in the world?
Right.
And then you then build on those commonalities, and hopefully that creates momentum for greater good.
But I'm arguing it doesn't just happen.
No.
The dry bones did not come together until somebody prophesied. That's why we got to get this book out there, because you need prophetic utterance for dry bones to come together. And that's what you've done, Richard, so you might as well just get ready.
Pressure.
Right.
Well, I would just
John.
add, working with young people, I
Yeah.
mean, I believe in the proverb, train up for the child in the way they should go when they're old and not depart from it. I think it's so important, even at young ages. And again, when we're dealing with wealth,
You just
when we're
step
dealing
into
with wealthy kids that come up in very wealthy backgrounds, is at a young age, instead of requiring community service, giving them a heart to want to serve. And we do that in our school. Just an example, like we have our elementary or lower school kids do Operation Christmas Child, which is a program done by Samaritan's Purse, Franklin Graham, where they give gifts to kids around the world who are in impoverished areas and to share the real meaning of Christmas. And the kids, we don't require kids to do it. We show them some testimonies from kids whose lives have been changed and just the impact when they receive these gifts. And we show them how to put them together. And every year we have, many who participate and are blessed by it and see the difference they make. And the same with our middle school kids. We partner with a school called the Cornerstone Schools here in Washington, D.C., the inner city school. And we have them raise money by running laps. And this year we're going to have students from the Cornerstone School come out. And we've raised enough the last couple of years for several scholarships for kids that are there. And but it's just giving them a heart for mission. And when I'm in schools, we are pre-K through 8. In schools I've been in, high school, we take kids on mission trips to Haiti and others where, like you said, they go in thinking this is going to make me feel good, and they realize, wow, I had no idea I was going to be served and how God can use me. And I think that's a lot of times people give for the feeling they can get and not realize, what can happen when they change a life and how that life changes theirs. And just helping kids see that difference and really growing up with that worldview.
Great. Yeah. Q&A from the audience, please. Yes, in the back. Start.
Good afternoon. My name is Femi Akimbi, and I thank the hosting institute for this event. I kind of liked it. I think the issue for me here is that all of it start from a framework. And if you indulge me for a few seconds, I put a little light on it. In the African mindset, we believe that everything is a circle in spirit, is continuous, is interconnected. The European mindset is that everything is separate and you have to have an opposite side. In the African mindset, we believe that the body and the mind are the same. The European think the mind control the body. And if hence is matter than the body, it should control the body. In the arena of matter and spirit, the European have mastered the separation of matter from spirit. And once you separate matter from spirit, what you get is a thin material, us. And that is a dead material. Henceforth, then, in the existence in this hemisphere, the initiative to drive industry, to produce more, to have growth, then this object is what we worship, and it becomes our second God. I think until we go back to a little bit of a framework to say, how do we get to merge both of this together, maybe we can come to a middle point. I think that's all I'm struggling with personally, and I'd like to have their take on it.
Yeah, good. Yeah, the reflections on the framework, mind and spirit, and is that connected with what we're talking about here, and Pastor Sori's addressed eloquently, namely the triumph of the material over the spirit. Yeah, comment.
There is no question that you are correct. The biblical perspective, if we point to even the Ten Commandments, the first commandment really is the sum total law. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. It's this worship of things, and we ultimately become a thing ourselves that supersedes all else, that drives us into this crisis. In my book, I talk about why are we drowning in debt, and I talk about the solution being a spiritual problem. What's visibly absent in Richard's book is a call for public policy. There is no law. There is no presidential candidate. There is no executive order that can address the gaps in these people's lives or anyone's lives, because the gaps do not come from government or obviously from money, because they have it. There is a spirit realm that is connected to and the core of all existence. And when we allow that to be separated or to be neglected even, to be malnourished, then we end up as carcasses walking. Yeah.
It's easy, Richard, reading your book, to get the impression that the material things are so overwhelming, right? Not only for the people who have made them, but then, as you suggest, for the children. It's so corrupted that the spirit, it's very hard for the spirit to work its way back into their lives. Am I being too pessimistic in reading that, or?
No, I think that's a great question. I think that the materialism is relative. And we're all responsible for the same thing. We have the same thing in your life and my life. It's always the next step. And it's kind of like a cocaine addiction. You know, you start with just a little bit, and that becomes your baseline. You look around, you say, well, I'm content where I am now, until you see somebody else in materialism that's got something more, just like cocaine. The next time you need a little more to get the same effect, and a little more and a little more. So at some point, you're so involved in the process that it pushes everything else out.
Right.
And then the part that creeps up on you that scares most people of great wealth oftentimes is when it becomes so complicated, and you own so much, and you have so many homes, and you have so many things, and so many people that want you, and so many people that are trying to distract you from anything you might find important, then your time begins to become consumed.
Right.
And that's probably one of the great complaints that I have of my clients is they say, I have no time. And if they came in a group like this worth $200-300 million and said, hey, people, feel sorry for me, I have no time. You know, I'm sure everybody would feel really sorry for them. You know, they don't get that from anybody, because the fact of the matter is nobody cares. They feel, you look at them, I look at them and say, your life should be perfect. You
Right.
have everything you want. And so there begets the question of what is it that you want? And if it's the stuff that's put in front of you, then it's going to have a hollowness to it. There's going to be a vacuum, as Benjamin Franklin said, right? It was there to originally to fill a vacuum, and all it did, money was create a vacuum.
Yeah, the time factor is interesting. That was one of Rockefeller's complaints. John D. Rockefeller, as he sort of scaled back his involvement with the oil company and began to turn more directly to philanthropy and he was so overwhelmed, and his time was so consumed. He felt like he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. It was so frenetic, and he had to, his advisors had to tell him that he really needed to address this in a much more systematic way, which is how, of course, the Rockefeller Foundation.
And interesting in that dynamic is John D. Rockefeller turned to his son and he said, I've turned the family name into a pretty nasty thing. I've really rampaged across this country.
Yeah.
Spend your life giving it away.
Right.
Let's make our name look good. And that's what he did. That's what the son did.
Yes, please, right here.
So I'd like to get some.
I'm sorry, if you could identify yourself.
Okay.
And
My name is
affiliation.
Denise Byrne, and I'm one of the founders of Friends of New Orleans. And I have a question for Richard and Ann. We have some friends of ours, very, very wealthy, very successful. They have 4 kids. They decided to do the warm money. The kids range from mid-20s to early 30s. And, his reasoning was, we don't want our kids competing for our attention based on, the inheritance later on. We want it equal, so they gave it all to the kids equally now. The kids have access to all that money now. And both parents, they came from money, very bright. He is an entrepreneur. He's made even more money. He's very passionate, very, very bright, very engaged. But it's amazing to me when you see the 4 kids, because there's no passion. I always say to my husband, this reminds me of these movies, about the very wealthy French or English back in those days where, the very rich, all they did was seek pleasure. So now he's created a national initiative that he's going to fund single-handedly around music. And I think he's hoping that these kids are going to get involved in this. So I'd love to hear from Richard in terms of, I'm sure you've probably seen situations like that. And then I'd also like to hear from Ann, what kind of advice would you give to my friend as he's setting up this national initiative that he's going to fund himself?
You want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. I have watched that in numerous examples. And what he's doing is he's creating a laboratory with a bunch of rats in it that he feels that he can inject this system. He's going to test it. And unfortunately, there's no return from that test. once they get there, they're going to be there permanently. I've watched that happen in probably 5 or 6 circumstances, all of them against my advice. The difficulty oftentimes, and I think now I'm going to broaden to your answer to say that the difficulty with we as parents in this generation, the boomers, when I say we, I'm kind of thinking, no offense, the boomers, we're the ones that have brought these kids up. And I think we have decided that they need to all play soccer. We've decided they all need to play tennis.
Right.
I think we've decided they all need trophies. Whether they did well or not, they need to participate. They need to, they need to find their way. They all need to go to college, right. Which I'm not opposed to education, but there's a lot of kids in my families that the families are ashamed if they don't go to college. They're ashamed. So they go to college and they fail and they trick the parents and they really didn't show up for the first year, and then they put them in another college and they buy their way into that, and that goes on in a number of instances. Those kids need to develop their own passion. And one of the things we do as parents is instead of just literally let them do what they want, we try to engineer them toward what we feel, with good intent, is a successful path for them.
Right.
It's actually a successful path for us.
Right.
Go ahead.
No, I agree with Richard. Before you started talking about the initiative of your friend here, who's working on, the National Initiative on Music, I wrote down on my notes, is this the parents' philanthropy or the children's philanthropy? And because in the sense where they could get involved with their parents' philanthropy, this initiative. Okay.
They inherited all that money. That was the end of the band.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, and so
Case in point.
And I think so. I would say there's a lot of ways. There's some kind of very honest conversations that have to happen with the kids, and probably maybe not even in front of their parents right away. Maybe just one-on-one. What do they care about, and what do they want to be involved with? Do they want to be involved with their parents' philanthropy and this initiative? If they do, how do they want to be involved? Do they want to be at the front lines and actually meet the people that they'll be funding, or do they want to take kind of a back seat and manage operations and do other very important tasks that perhaps might not necessarily be so high profile? Or they say, I love music, but I actually want to focus on the environment. Then and if it's their money, then hopefully they can start having a discussion with their parents and say, thank you so much for this opportunity. I realize that it's my responsibility, but this is the path I want to take. So I agree with Richard that sometimes, it's kind of the dream of, we all kind of in our minds imagine ways how our children might want to, grow into their own and have our kind of share the same passions. But I do think that the key here is that they have to have ownership of that money, and if they feel like it's somebody else's mission, it's somebody else's vision, they're never going to really get involved.
I would ask them to find somebody who did exactly what they're trying to do, the way they're trying to do it, and it worked. I mean, that's what we do in business. I mean, if your friend has been as successful as you describe in business, he has created a business model based on some assumptions that were reasonable. I'd like to know what his assumptions are that cause him to believe this will work, because I think you'll find that she's right.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, Richard, my family struggling to get their kids involved and passionate about something,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
So have you seen any of them
Yeah.
come up with this experiment and
exactly
it actually
what Ann
works?
said. It's about trying to determine, one, do they have a donative intent now? They may not. They may be young enough. They're just not in the place where they want to go out searching for something to give to. And two, if they have a donative intent, what's that about? What would they like to see changed? And the trouble is, a lot of times kids with their young, we're talking kids in their 20s or something like that. Is that how old they are? Or younger? The question is just identifying, is there a passion or not? That's really where there is. And once that happens, you can steer it in a direction. I'll make an offer to you that I've never made to anybody in this deal, and this is at no charge. You tell them to read the book, and then you tell them the author will take your call. Because you have them call, and I'll say, you want some experience real quick, because there's only one story here. You know, this is a tough area, and I have counseled many of my clients in this area, and they have changed their direction about what they're doing with their kids and what they're forcing on their kids, and really kind of taking this position of letting them struggle. I'll tell you very briefly, there's a major university whose namesake of the grandfather has the last name on it. Private, one of the best in the country. The granddaughter is a client of mine. The grandfather endowed hundreds of millions of dollars into this university to make it happen. The granddaughter lives on a budget of $6,000 a month, and that's all she gets. And she says, I'm so happy. And he said, but what went along with it? He said, well, I have a foundation that I wasn't allowed to spend until I could identify what I was going to do with it. And she finally, at the age of about 50, went on fire for something she really loved. And so she now, on a shoestring budget, think of that, with a name that would kill, she goes out and gives away millions of dollars to this one particular organization that she has vested her life into.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's actually, there are many stories of family patriarchs and matriarchs who thought they would resolve family problems by setting up foundations and involving their kids. And the stories have not always turned out well, as you can imagine.
Right.
One can go down the list of, MacArthur Foundation, Pew, and so forth. Number of major national foundations. If the patriarch had understood what was going to happen to the money, he might not have been quite so happy.
Yes,
but,
you're right.
There is that. There actually is a pretty well defined track record out there. These kinds of efforts that have, many of them have not turned out well. I'm struck by this question. Developing a passion. How on earth do you develop a passion when everything comes so easily? When everything
you can write the second book.
You just
on that if you
basically,
want.
well, and I'm wondering if Pastor Sori's point about pain, the need for pain.
That helps. That helps.
There's a connection.
Pain helps passion.
There's a connection.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you might not say something about that connection between pain and passion. I think there is something there, and I'm not quite sure what it is, but I was struck by the way Pastor Sori's put it. And maybe you all could.
Yeah, I think in my book, what I call that is that idea of contraction and expansion. Yeah. I think that's what I used. I tried to be non-biblical. If I was being biblical, I'd say Romans 5:3. And I think more than that, I think you embrace the struggle. That's the thing we don't do. Be joyful in the struggle. It's it, right? Because struggle creates character perseverance, and perseverance hope. That's what these people, my clients, want. They want hope that they make a difference. And the difficulty is it's hard to get to a place of struggle. So the struggle becomes not a financial one, but a struggle of where did the rest of my things go? Where did my family go? What happened with all these things? Why are they so dysfunctional? And in that, sometimes they wind up having a struggle that creates a passion to do something about it.
And how can we bring the struggle of the poor?
Well, when my father died, he was 47. I had an 8-year-old sister. I was 24. And of course, we were so overwhelmed by the fact that this child would not have a father like we did, that by the time she was 14, she was spoiled rotten. I couldn't stand her. I mean, I just didn't like my own sister. And I sent her to Jamaica for a summer to stay with friends of mine up in St. Anne's Parish, no running water, no electricity, no paved sidewalks, and she lived there for a month. Her life has never been the same. She came back with a different perspective on life. She had to use an outhouse. She didn't have any electricity. Every Friday she had to watch the butcher come and kill the cow, and that experience changed her life. Now it was pain it was only pain from an inconvenience perspective. But my sons are 22. I've been a pastor all their life. They've been the princes of the church. They got their own deacons to drive them around. The biggest mistake my wife and I made was to let my sons watch the movie Richie Rich when they were kids. Because my two black sons grew up believing they were rich. And tomorrow, right about this time, we're going to dinner. They're 22. And we're going to have that talk about pain and options and entitlement and budgets and deadlines. And just the news will be pain. Just the thoughts And I don't know about white people, but with black kids, you have to induce pain. You have to, you can't hope they you got to send them somewhere.
Yeah.
You got to take them to hell and leave them there, and then have them work on crawling out, because it is it's a tragedy. It's really this sense of entitlement. It's tragic among the wealthy, but at least they have something to which they will be entitled. It's worse with us, because I was diagnosed with prostate cancer in November of 2010, and all of my sons' lives, we've talked to them about finances, and they know that I'm not rich, but I'm well insured. And as we were preparing for surgery, my father died in surgery, and so it was kind of traumatic. And it occurred to me that a part of them wanted me to live, but a part of them wasn't that worried.
Yeah.
Because they knew I'm well insured. I mean, so insurance money can help you get over your grief. So I took them, and this is pain. I took them to the bank, and I sat down. I said, now the good news is that when I die, if I don't come to this surgery, here is what you and your mother will be worth. But here is how yours is structured. There are triggers to the release of those funds. And they were like the rich young ruler. They went away sorrowful. I mean, because it occurred to me that they need to understand I'm well insured, but you are not getting a big check the week after my funeral. And so it takes different kinds of catalysts to provoke our children, especially, to I'll call it constructive pain.
I would also say, and this makes me, John can probably speak to this much better than I could about media, but something that I'm struck with all the stories that you share in your book, Richard, is that, at the end of the day, we're all human and we all have heartbreak, all right? Mm-hmm. And that it doesn't matter how much money you have or how little you have, we all experience the loss of a loved one, we all experience rejection, we all experience all the variety of different things that hurt, that can hurt, right? And so I'm not saying, you were talking about a lot of the media and how these celebrities are exalted in a sense. And it would be interesting to kind of how does one focus one's attention on the real life stories of pain sometimes, or even how, surmounting that pain, right, and getting out of those trenches and really finding one's calling. Right. And I don't know, it just made me think a lot about what you were saying earlier, because if you kind of shift the conversation, if you start shifting perhaps the emphasis, maybe, the kids who do feel entitled might feel a little less so.
Well, I think about this story of Bethany Hamilton. If you saw maybe Soul Surfer, it's a young lady who lost her arm to a shark, and horrifically tragic. It was a miracle she lived, but just amazing young woman of faith who, obviously questioned why would God allow this to happen, but came back and, surfed again, amazing with one arm. It was a championship surfer, and the platform she has had, and she had no idea that what God was going to do with her life and speaking to people who had lost limbs, who were hopeless, and she went all over the world and still is just an amazing person. And I know that story really spoke to my daughters. We lived in California for a short time period. I know you're a surfer.
Yes,
but,
and I know Bethany too.
Well, and so she's just been an amazing witness. And my girls, we read her biography together, autobiography, before we saw the movie, and it was very powerful. But I think when you look at people like that, and it's amazing role models who've been through tremendous tragedy and have all the reasons to question and say why, and just go the other way, and how she persevered, to your point, perseverance leading to hope, going through those crises. I think it's great for kids to see.
More questions? Yes, please. The microphone is right here.
My name is Ruth Lubick, and I'm a nurse midwife working in Washington to try to reduce the infant mortality amongst African Americans, and succeeding at it, but not through technology. But my question really relates to whether the speakers can say anything about the examples that are provided by the parents to the children. Is it a situation where the father is so busy making money that he's never home? I don't know about that. People ask me where I got my passion, and I'm a child of the Great Depression. I was born in 1927. So we saw sadness all around us, and but my father and mother never sat me down and said, now this is the way you do it. But they showed me. They tried. My father was a pharmacist. He hocked my mother's jewelry to be able to buy medicines for people in the community. So the example that I had, that's what I'm asking you really. What is the example that these kids have had? Would you try to change the way parents give examples to their children? Because that's my business. I'm a midwife.
Anybody else want to take first?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, that is the reason that you're passionate is because the distance between where you were and where you are is great. And that's what a lot of passion is about. It's about the struggle from where you start. You said you're a baby of the Depression. You know what that feels like, and you get to this place and you know, you feel the gap and you feel the accomplishment of getting where you are. The difficulty with them, obviously, is these parents oftentimes are negligent. It really, I tell the parents, in my case, that this is the parents' fault. Don't strap this on the children, because the children are just following the lead. Everybody gets to an age where the kids are 25 and they come to me and they say, my kid is so disenchanted and so uninterested and so dispassionate, and what's the matter with them? I mean, shame on them. They ought to go work in a camp for a while. Well, the revelation came when they were 25 years old.
Right.
Parents need to be proactive about that early on. And I'll tell you one of the ways I did it, and I wasn't going to say this either, but because it exposes me a little bit, but my father was relatively well off, came from nothing. When it got to college, I went off to college, and he said, well, I paid for your brother, I'll pay for you too. And I said, no, I don't think so. I want to do this on my own. I'll work and I'll go to college myself. Well, I did that. And my brother and I are still very close. I then went on to law school from there. I worked a job, I went to law school at night. I worked a job during the day. I remember when my wife and I didn't have enough money to pay the rent. All of those times, well, my older brother, got kind of coddled, and we love each other. We're really close. But if you could see where he is now, passionate-wise, and where I am now, he is asking me, where in the world did we grow up in the same family? And you got the passion and I didn't. Where's that? He's a great guy. The difference is that he didn't have that chasm that was created. I self-imposed the chasm. And what I've done to my own kids, again with my wife, kind of, we did this later on. But I told my kids, I said, we've been relatively successful. We got a beautiful home and things and stuff. And I sat all the kids down. I said, I want to be really clear with you that I'm leaving absolutely everything to charity. We're all going into a foundation. You will get nothing. My dad did that to us. My dad told us. He thought it was a good idea. He saw the difference of what was happening. He said, guys, when I die, you will get nothing. You will get nothing. And we got nothing. And it was, you know what it did? From about age 16 when he told us that, I got moving. I got moving. I didn't go to law school because I just thought it might fill some void. I went to law school because I thought I could make enough money to live. And by the time my dad died when I was 35, we all 4 of the kids were off on careers, and everybody very proud. We love him for that, he and Mom for doing that. I'm going to do the same thing to my kids, and they know it.
Well, my kids are going to hate you.
Yeah.
My children are going to
I don't doubt it.
They're going to hate you.
Yeah.
I promise you. You've just widened the chasm.
I know. I wrote about this at the Huffington Post last week, published an article. And I got to tell you something. I never got so much backlash when I said, maybe no inheritance is better inheritance. And you can read it. And I'll tell you, I wasn't saying inheritance is bad.
Right.
I'm just saying know what you're doing when you do it and schedule it if you're going to schedule it. But I got to tell you something. The backlash from all the people that are waiting for their parents to do the El Croco dance and do the liquidity event and exit stage right.
Right.
They were upset and they wrote blogs back and forth. This guy's out of touch with reality. Well, so be it. It worked for me.
This guy's had his hand up for an hour.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Edward Rotor. I'm a journalist here in town and do some freelance tutoring on the side. And I wonder if any of the panelists would care to comment on an observation. That is that a lot of the children of the wealthy in the better schools in town and the better graduate schools, I could swear they cheated on their SATs. And they asked me to, not to help them grasp a subject or write a paper, but to write the paper for them. And it seems commonplace today in graduate school at the top schools that the children of the wealthy cheated to get into school and are cheating to get their degrees without learning anything. The consequences of that would seem to be huge. And I'm wondering if any of you have any observations on that.
I taught at 2 different graduate schools, one very prestigious, and I was shocked and appalled at the lack of intellectual and academic capacity of my students on a master's level at an Ivy League school. I wouldn't make a blanket statement, but I'm not shocked by what you asked.
Paige, any questions?
I just want to plug my column. I quoted a University of Chicago professor, a University of Chicago professor who wrote to me because I'd recently written about what my own economic professor had suggested of a college equivalent GED, because we have this big gap that Charles Murray writes about now. That a high school diploma now is not enough. And but they've got this big gap. As you were mentioning, not everybody belongs in a 4-year school either, and yet they've got the knowledge. Anyway, this retired University of Chicago professor wrote to me about how it's a psychology professor who wrote to me about how she gave a critical thinking assignment of evaluate this article from a scientific journal. Several students are quite upset with her. One young lady who was a top student and a senior wrote a digest. She didn't write really an evaluation, and got very upset when she got a 0. And she said, "You're asking us to think. Nobody's asked us to think before." No. And so that's part of the problem too. The students aren't even being asked to learn critical. I've gotten mailbags full of emails, if there's such a thing, from other colleges and people and graduates, et cetera, saying the same thing. So I think the entitlement society, I'll bring this right back to that there's an academic entitlement as well that is embedded in the system now, and faculty members, including my own wife, who teaches at GW here, run up against it. So it's not just money. It's also just having some sense of independence and critical thinking in your own mind. Those leadership skills.
Right.
Let the translate. This is Clarence Page in the Chicago Tribune. Yeah.
Bob Woodson,
And
Center for Neighborhood Enterprise. I have a companion question I've always wanted. One of my children, we applied to Sidwell Friends, and he did not test, and therefore was turned down. The question is, yet when the sons and daughters of celebrities suddenly find themselves appointed to office, their children always get admitted. Jesse Jackson Jr., Eleanor Holmes Norton, Bill Clinton, everyone, and the question is, are the sons and daughters of these celebrities smarter than the rest of us, or do they get some special consideration when they apply to schools like Sidwell Friends?
Let's use that as the last question and last comments, because it is almost 2 o'clock, and as I told Pastor Soares, we leave at 2. So last reflections and any thoughts on Bob's question. Yeah, that's right. You've got a lot to answer for, Mr. Murray.
Get me out of the Independent School Association. I mean, I'm sure at any school you have favoritism. You have big alumni, you have big donors, and I think that's the challenge of just being fair, having a standard, staying by it. You know, I had a situation where I was at a school in North Carolina where I had a very prominent bank president who came in, and I had a lot of pressure from certain people to admit his child. And I sat down with them and just said, look, and to his credit, he said, I know you're under a lot of pressure to admit my son. And I said, you're right, I am. And but I said, you know, he will not thrive here. Academically, he had some serious, severe learning issues that we were not able to accommodate. And I just said, this will not be a good fit for him. And we want him to succeed. And so a year later, I ran into him at a party, and he came up, and again, just by God's grace, thanked me, said he had sent him to a school, he was thriving, and he was so thankful that he knew the pressure I was under to accept him. And I just think that, again, is just putting the child first. And so that's where I think it is a huge challenge when you know a big family can bring notoriety to the school or money. But anyway.
Richard slept in a sleeping bag all night long so that he could be first in line to get his child into a school, and he knows everybody.
Yeah, I think I just got thrown under the bus. I did do that. That's to get my kid into a good school. Yeah, what was I thinking? That was a long time ago.
Okay, final reflections. All right.
Yeah, let me just add. This is way off topic, but I just want to leave you with a quick story about the janitor. And I want to just tell you this because it's from my world, and I think it shows the connection sometimes that these different classes. We talk about the super rich, and now we're connecting to people that are middle income, and then the connection. What connects us to those other people that are low income? I surf. I'm a big surfer. I've done it when my kids challenged me about 10 years ago. I started longboard surfing, and I've done it at 6 o'clock in the morning every morning for 150 mornings a year for 10 years now. And during that time, there are handles that people use for people in the water. You'd have different names and nicknames. And the best surfer in the lineup, there's about 200 people. And the best surfer in the lineup is a 55-year-old guy named Pete Herrera, who just texted me and said, "Where are you?" And that's meaningful to me, because today, Thursday, is my surf day, and at 6 o'clock I wasn't there. The important part you need to know is that Pete is a janitor in the local high schools. He's a Hispanic janitor. He actually happens to be the very best surfer that you could ever see in the water, so everybody reveres him. In my world, he's come out into my world before. He gets what he calls stink eye, where people just look down their nose at him, and so he's not comfortable sometimes in some of the places that he goes, that he shows up in my world. But I get out in the water, and for the first 2 or 3 years, anybody that gets a nod from Pete, the janitor, nicknamed the janitor, is in the lineup. And whether you understand what that means, if you're not on the in crowd of the lineup, you don't get a wave. You sit out there for hours, you get nothing. But if you're on the in with a lineup, you really are somebody special, and everybody automatically likes you in that neighborhood, in that world. And I had been courteous to Pete. I'd done everything I could to be nice to this guy, and he knew my boys, who were all good surfers. And about 2 years ago, I was surfing, and some guy we hadn't seen before on a big wave cut me off. That just means he snaked me. He came in, caused me to purl into the wave, and that's a traumatic thing. And Pete watched it, and the lineup watched it, and it happened again about 10, 15 minutes later. Well, Pete's the most mellow guy you could ever imagine. He would never yell at anybody, never curses anybody, never ever gets near. He has perfect etiquette in the water. And Pete came up to this guy. He took off. Everybody saw him paddle, and they thought, my God, Pete's paddling onto the same wave as this guy that bumped Richard. And he got up like this next to him, and he kept going. And then I saw his board bump, and this guy went purling into the wave. And everybody was astounded, because the first time in years and years, the 8 years I've been, I'd never seen Pete do anything like that. So the guy comes back out. He's yelling every kind of profanity at Pete. Pete doesn't say a word. He comes back out. The wave builds up again. We get on the wave again. Here goes Pete again. Everyone's watching thinking, well, God, Pete must be on some kind of drugs, because Pete's going for this guy again. And he goes out there, and he bangs this guy, and the guy purls up. And now the guy's furious, and Pete says, unless you want a problem with all the 50 other people here in the water, I think you need to go ashore. You need to leave. Well, everyone can't believe this thing's happening. And out Pete paddles, and I'm sitting around 20 people, and he hardly knows my name at that time, 2 years ago. And he points at me, and he says, Rich, he said, that's what I can do for you. He says, you're a good guy. and I want you to know that I care about what you're doing here. I want to tell you, for the next 10 times I was in the water, all that I heard from people is, did the janitor did that for you? Well, I got to tell you something. In his world, in my world now, when I go out there, I got 50 people saying hello to me.
Yeah.
In my little world of surfing out there where nobody with money means anything,
Right.
the king has given me the nod.
Right.
So it's a nice thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank you.